The Grammy Awards are often seen as the highest honor in music, but they always seem to get it wrong. In this video, we'll look at 8 great albums that were snubbed by the Grammys. Born to Die by Lana Del Rey. Lana Del Rey's Born to Die is one of the most legendary albums to come out of the 2010s, but it was dismissed by some critics when it was first released. But it is now considered a classic, blending old Hollywood glamour with a twist. Lana crafted a cinematic world filled with lush orchestrations. Songs like Video Games, Born to Die, and Summertime Sadness were big hits, with their mix of nostalgia and sadness that felt unlike anything else in pop at that time. Despite its commercial success, debuting at number 2 on the Billboard 200 and massive cultural influence, Born to Die was completely shut out of the major Grammy categories. Part of this may have been due to early media backlash. Critics accused Lana of being inauthentic, not buying her persona. But over time, the album's legacy only grew. Artists like Lorde, Billie Eilish, and Halsey would later cite it as a defining influence on their music, as it became a blueprint for a new generation of pop storytellers. Born to Die isn't just a great album, it was really a pivotal moment. It redefined what pop could sound and feel like. The Grammys' failure to recognize it shows their inability to predict the sound that would go on to define music. Lana Del Rey may have been too ahead of her time for the Academy in 2012, but the world eventually caught up, and today, the album stands as one of the most influential records of that era. After Hours by The Weeknd. When After Hours dropped in March 2020, it was instantly iconic. Cohesive cinematic exploration of The Weeknd's journey, heavily influenced by synthpop. The album's singles had that retro 1980s aesthetic. Songs like Save Your Tears, In Your Eyes, and especially Blinding Lights dominated global charts and redefined the sound of mainstream pop. With its intricate production and cohesive storytelling, After Hours was the peak of The Weeknd's career, where he got both critical and commercial success. It was an unstoppable force. Blinding Lights became one of the biggest hits in Billboard Hot 100 history, spending 90 weeks on the chart, including 57 weeks in the top 10. The album's visual universe, from the bloodied red suit to the Vegas-centered music videos that told a whole story, it became instantly iconic. Critics praised it for pushing the boundaries of pop, and people thought it was a shoo-in for the Album of the Year Grammy that year. But when the 2021 Grammy nominations were announced, After Hours received 0 nominations, not a single nod in any category. The backlash was immediate. The decision was one of the most baffling snubs in Grammy history. The Weeknd even publicly called out the Grammys, calling them corrupt, and said he would never submit his music for nomination going forward. Ironically, the album's continued success, from the Super Bowl halftime show performance to multi-platinum certifications, proved that his cultural footprint far outlasted any golden trophy. Since then, The Weeknd has squashed the beef with the Grammys, even performing at last year's award show. 4 by Beyonce. By 2011, Beyonce was already a global superstar, with multiple Grammys under her belt, but when she released 4, it was a turning point in her career. It was an album rooted in musicality, rather than chasing hits, emphasizing vocal arrangements and timeless songwriting over commercial hooks. Tracks like Love on Top, 1+1, and End of Time showcased her vocal range, delivering great music. Despite being less focused on mainstream dominance, 4 was far from a commercial disappointment. It debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 and spawned fan favorites that became staples in Beyonce's live performances. Critics praised it for its maturity and cohesion, recognizing it as a deliberate shift from the pop bangers of the I Am Such a Fierce era. The album laid the groundwork for Beyonce's later experimental projects like Beyonce and Lemonade. Yet, when Grammy season arrived, 4 received no recognition, no Album of the Year nominations, or any nods. Even though the song Love on Top won at the 2013 Grammys, it was an astonishing oversight considering how great the album was. In hindsight, it has aged gracefully, often cited as a transitional point where Beyonce transformed from a pop star into a complete artist. The Grammys' failure to recognize it showed her complicated history with the Grammys. Even though she is the most awarded artist in the award show's history, she just only won Album of the Year last year for the first time. Blackout by Britney Spears. When Blackout arrived in 2007, Britney Spears was in the midst of one of the most turbulent years of her life. Paparazzi chaos, tabloid headlines, and personal struggles had taken center stage. But through the storm, she released what would become her most forward-thinking album. Blackout fused electro R&B and futuristic pop, She reinvented her sound and delivered banger after banger. Critics, once skeptical of Britney's artistry, liked the album. Rolling Stone hailed it as her most adventurous album yet, and it is considered one of the best pop albums of the 2000s. Tracks like Gimme More, Piece of Me, and Break the Ice are still undeniable bangers that paved the way for the digital pop world of the late 2000s. The album's sound would later define much of the 2010s electropop, yet despite its groundbreaking production and cultural influence, Blackout received no love from the Grammys. It was left out of every major category, getting 0 nominations. And considering how the album would later come to be recognized as the blueprint for modern pop, it should have at least gotten 1 or 2 nods. Rated R by Rihanna. When Rated R dropped in late 2009, the world was expecting the upbeat sound of Rihanna's previous albums. Instead, it was a darker album, with its sound and aesthetics. Coming off one of the most traumatic moments in her life, her abuse at the hands of Chris Brown, she poured her pain into her music. Tracks like Russian Roulette and Cold Case Love showed vulnerability rarely seen in mainstream pop, while with songs like Hard and Rude Boy, she gave you timeless bangers. She reinvented herself on the album. Musically, Rated R was ahead of its time. The album touches on a lot and doesn't have a consistent sound like Rihanna albums at that time. The album's experimental sounds laid the groundwork for the darker aesthetics that would later dominate pop in the early 2010s. Critics praised it, calling it Rihanna's best album up to that point. Yet, when the Grammy season arrived, Rated R was virtually ignored, overshadowed by albums like The Fame Monster and Teenage Dream. No album of the year, no pop vocal album recognition, not even a major performance spotlight. It was a glaring oversight. Looking back, Rated R stands as one of Rihanna's best projects, the moment she evolved from a chart-topping singer into a multifaceted artist. Its Grammy snub was proof that innovation sometimes goes uncelebrated at the award show. Reputation by Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift's Reputation was one of the most anticipated albums of the 2010s, and one of her most divisive at that time. Following public feuds and media backlash, Taylor re-emerged with a darker, more confrontational persona. The album had a different attitude and sound, with industrial synths and trap-inspired beats, showing a different side of Taylor. The album's narrative arc goes from vengeance and isolation, like on Look What You Made Me Do, to the soft sounds of Delicate. Over time, Reputation's reputation has only grown, as it has been reassessed as one of her boldest albums. Despite massive commercial success when it was first released, over 1 million first-week sales on a global stadium tour, Reputation was largely ignored by the Grammys. It failed to secure nominations, with none for Album of the Year or Best Pop Vocal Album, and none of its singles received major category recognition. For an artist whose previous albums, Fearless in 1989, dominated the Grammys, even winning Album of the Year, the snub was surprising. It may not have gotten Grammy Gold, but Reputation's legacy has only grown stronger with time, now considered one of Taylor's best albums. Hounds of Love by Kate Bush. Kate Bush's Hounds of Love was a masterclass in art pop innovation, an album that redefined what mainstream music could sound like. Released in 1985, it was a creative peak for Kate, who wrote, produced, and arranged many of the songs herself. It fused orchestration with early sampling technology, creating a sound that was experimental. The first side of the album, featuring songs like Running Up That Hill and Cloud Busting, blurred the lines between pop and performance art. The second half of the album, The Ninth Wave, was even more ambitious, a conceptual story following a woman adrift at sea, drifting between consciousness and dreamlike visions. That was unheard of in mainstream pop at the time. Decades later, it continues to influence modern artists like Florence and the Machine and St. Vincent. It is always in conversations for best pop albums of that era, and yet, Hounds of Love received no Grammy nominations when it first came out. Around that time, the Grammys rewarded more conventional pop and soft rock, overlooking the visionary works that would later define the decade. Ironically, Running Up That Hill would find its long-deserved global resurgence nearly 40 years later, thanks to Stranger Things, reintroducing Kate Bush to a new generation. The snub shows that true artistry isn't always recognized in its time, but it was surely aged well. Illmatic by Nas. When Illmatic dropped in April 1994, it wasn't just another hip-hop debut, it was a game-changer. Nas, barely 20 years old, delivered a cinematic masterpiece that captured the essence of New York rap, backed by a dream team of producers including DJ Premier, Pete Rock, and Q-Tip. Illmatic was the perfect rap album. It is always in conversations for the greatest rap album ever recorded, but yet the Grammys didn't recognize it. Not a single nomination. For an album that would go on to define the very structure of lyrical hip-hop, that was surprising. Part of the reason Illmatic was snubbed was timing. The Grammys had only recently started acknowledging rap as a legitimate art form, and their voters were still largely disconnected from the genre's core audience. In 1994, the category for Best Rap Album didn't even exist yet. It would debut 2 years later in 1996, so while Nas was redefining rap, the Academy was still trying to understand what hip-hop even was. The influence of Illmatic has outlasted almost every album from that era. Its snub by the Grammys has become symbolic, not just for Nas's underappreciation, but for a system that once couldn't recognize genius outside of their comfort zones. Which great albums that were snubbed by the Grammys did I miss? Tell me in the comments below.